If you're watching this video, that means you are probably using the advanced command handler from episode 22 of my Discord.js series. Well, I actually made an important mistake within that I'm going to show you how to fix within this video. So if you ever ran into any errors when using this, especially when adding a lot of commands where it says a possible memory leak has been detected, that's the problem that I'm going to show you how to fix real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my commandbase.js file. And I'm also going to open up my index file as well. We're going to be slightly modifying both of these. So scrolling down to where we are registering a command, which this function is called for every single command, we are also registering a listener. And this is going to be a problem because we should really only have one listener, and then inside that listener, we should loop through all the commands rather than registering a specific listener for each individual command. This is unoptimized and it's bad practice. And so I'm going to show you how to fix that because obviously I can't go back and edit the original video. So the first step is I'm going to click on the starting curly brace here, and that will automatically highlight the ending curly brace. So I can start here, including both of these characters. I can scroll all the way up, hold Shift and click, and it will select all of this code. We can then use Control X to cut it, and we're going to place this inside of its own function. We're also going to export this function. So I could say module.exports.listen equals a function here. And one parameter we need is the client. We can then paste in our code here. And this is code that we're going to come back and do more editing to. But essentially, we want to call this one function only one time within our main file. We can go ahead and clear up some of the empty blank lines at the end there. We also no longer need this client parameter, so we can delete that. And because we deleted it in this file, it is very important that we go back and delete it right here. Otherwise, it will think our client is the options object, which is not correct. We also have access to the listen function that was created in our command base. So after we registered all the commands, we can then say command base.listen. We can then pass in our client. Now I'm going to save this, and index should be good to go. I'm going to close that. And now we have more things to change within our command base. So previously, we had access to all this information automatically within our listener because our listener was the same function or the same scope as all the information. Now we want to store all of our commands inside of an object, and then we can retrieve that within a specific listener. So I'm going to create an object called all commands. This is outside of any function. So const all commands equals an object. I can then go to the bottom of this, and after we validate the permissions, we then want to store this inside of that. In fact, we want to store every single alias or every single command within the commands array inside this object. So we can loop through the commands array for const command of commands with an S. And then here we can say all commands index of command equals an object. And this object will store a lot of information that is coming from our command options. So I'm actually going to copy this. And we are going to use something called object destructuring to essentially take the properties of our command options object and place it inside of this object. So we can add 3 dots and then the name of the object. Now we've already done some editing to our commands array and to our permissions array. So we want to ensure that we include those after we destructure it, because if there was already commands and permissions within this object, then including them afterwards within this new object here is going to override them from our command options object. So here we can pass in commands and permissions. We can then scroll up and we can delete everything in here that is not either commands or permissions. And now everything should be good to go on this base function. Now what we need to change is inside our listener. Here we are trying to loop through commands, and we're trying to gain access to things such as permissions and permission error when we don't have access to those anymore. So the next step here is going to be ensuring that the content of the message sent starts with our prefix. And if we scroll down, here we are gaining access to all of the arguments based off of a empty character. And then we're also removing the first one, which is going to be the prefix and the command together. So I'm actually going to select these 2 lines, and I'm going to use Control X to cut them. And then scrolling up, I'm going to paste them before our for loop because we actually want access to what this is returning. I can say const name equals arguments.shift. So if my command was exclamation point ping, and then let's say hello world, which obviously this ping command that we've been working with won't actually have any arguments, but just for example, the arguments would then be hello world, but the name variable on line 94 would then be ping. And so we can then use this to check to see what the actual command properties are from our all commands object, which we created up here. So I can come back down here. I'm going to get rid of these. We're also going to say .to lowercase, just in case that we have a prefix or a command name that has characters in it. We want to ensure that we're not just checking for the exact capitalization, but we're checking for all use cases. So here, we can now use an if statement. So if name dot starts with prefix. And prefix is something we imported at the top of our file from our config JSON. So scrolling back down, within this if statement, we now know that we are dealing with a command. We can now try accessing that command from our all commands object. So I can say const command equals all commands index of name. However, there's a problem with this because our name still includes our prefix. We can easily replace the prefix with nothing, like so. So now we just have the name of the command that was actually ran, and we're seeing if it actually exists within our all commands object. If the command does not exist, we can then simply return. And that means that after this if statement, we know for sure that we have a valid command. So we want to go into this if statement right here. And here we have a similar if statement to see if this is actually a valid command. Clicking on the starting curly brace will then highlight the ending curly brace in VS Code. So starting with this return statement and upwards, we can then select all of this, use Control X to cut it, and now we can delete this entire for loop. We can then paste it in here, and we can also get rid of this ending return statement, because that was there to ensure we didn't continue to loop through something where we didn't need to, and because we're no longer using a for loop, we don't need to do that. Here we're just using a standard if statement. So everything's good now, aside from the fact that we don't have access to anything. So I'm going to destructure some properties from our command object. So I can say const object equals command, and then within this object, we need access to some things such as the permissions. So we can then gain access to the permissions. We also need access to permission error. So I'm going to copy this here and paste it. And previously we had a default message. The default message was you do not have permission to run this command. You can go ahead and add in whatever text you want though. So scrolling down further, we now need required roles. So I can say required roles, and this may not exist. So we're going to assign this a default value of an empty array because we are trying to loop through it. That way we don't have an error, just in case you don't need any required roles for your command. We also need access to min args, which by default is 0, and max args with a capital A, which by default is null. We need expected args, and finally our callback. So this is all the information we need from our command, so the rest of this code here can execute correctly. So now we can save this. I'm going to go ahead and open this in my terminal. I can then run this with nodemon. And we see that we have registered the add and the ping command. If I open up Discord to a testing server, I could then run exclamation point ping, and it's going to reply with pong, and I can then do add 10 and 15, and we see the sum is 25. So now the command handler is still working, but we are only registering a single listener for the entire command handler rather than a listener per command, which is a problem that should have been fixed. But again, unfortunately, I cannot go back in time and edit the video, so I'm making this update video and hopefully you see it.